everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we're continuing on with our Christmas in July project for 2023, and that is where we're sewing the Festive Friends trio from Cool Crafting, and these were designed by Sarah Peel of Cool Crafting, and I'll pop a link up here to their website because Sarah and her team, based in Cumbria I think, have got a kit for the Festive Friends, so you can buy everything that you need to make these in one hit. So just so that you know that that's possible, and that's the fabrics that and the haberdashery that I'm working from for making these. So we've been making Pere Hiver, who is shown here, and we're going to be now making his boots, and he's also got a hat that goes on top of his head, obviously, but he's got a hat as well, and so we're going to be making those two items, and then finally I'll just be sewing his beard onto his face as well, and we'll be doing that. So I'll do those three things in this one video just so that he's all nice and complete. So I've got Pere here looking very smart. He's got his bloomers on underneath, and then he's got his lovely warm winter coat on there on top. So I'm going to angle the camera down and we'll make him some boots, we'll make him his hat, and then I am going to add his beard on as well, because I think that Santas to me have beards on, but the beard is optional, so you can choose whether you do that or not. Okay, bear with me and I'll just pop us down. Okay, so in order to make the boots and the hat, we're going to need to find your piece of the felt from out of the kit. I am going to press this as well before I start cutting it out, and I'll use some steam, and that will just get these crease marks out. And it's much easier to get the crease marks out whilst your fabric is in the flat rather than once you've made it up into the garment. So I'll be doing that in a second, but just for now let's just talk about our pattern pieces. So we're going to need to cut 4 pieces of our boots. So I've got 2 pattern pieces out, so I can do 2 of each of those at the same time. We need just 2 of the soles, so I've just got 1 pattern piece for the sole. And then for the hat, we also need to cut out 2 of the hat as well at the same time. And I'm going to cut out all of those out of my red felt at the same time, because I don't want to cut into this until I'm sure that I've got all of my pattern pieces correctly positioned on. So that's why I've got those together. I'm keeping the boot cuff and the headband separate because we need those to be cut out of what's left of our oatmeal boucle, so we'll be doing those in a minute. And I've also got the template for the beard fur as well, and I'll keep that to one side because we'll be working on that in a minute as well. So let's go on to our fabric, and I'm going to lay this out now, but I'll go and iron it first, and then I'll be laying it out for good. So get your pattern pieces together and get your felt, press your felt, and then meet me back here, and then we'll start to pin our pattern pieces onto our fabric. So now that we've got our nice piece of flat felt, what we can do is choose which side you want to be your right side and which side you want to be the wrong side. I want that to be my right side, so I'm going to fold this with right sides together. And with felt there's no real right side or wrong side, but you might find that one has just got slightly more mottling than the other. And that's why I've chosen that side. It just looks just slightly different to me, but that's it might not bother you at all, and it might just be the same. So then let's have a look and see how we can get these pattern pieces onto our felt. There is no grain of the fabric with felt, so we don't need to worry about that, but we can then just pin our pattern pieces onto it once we get ourselves organised. So I just start by pinning the biggest pieces on first, because then sometimes that will give you little areas that you can pin the smaller pieces on, and it'll work quite nicely for you. That's one there. So now let's have a look and see, can we fit a boot in there? Yep, we can fit a boot in just here, so let's pop that in there. Now button them right up to each other so that we can make the best we can. Oh, the other thing that you'll notice as well is that I've got seam allowance, so on each of my pattern pieces I've actually added 1/4 inch seam allowance onto mine. I haven't on this top edge because that's got seam allowance already in it for attaching the boot, but along the front here and round and along the sole, then I made Florin's boots by adding in seam allowance, and it worked really well for me, and I could machine stitch it, so I'm going to do the same again. So I just wanted to let you know that. So I'm going to put that edge of that boot right up against there, and that's going to just sit in there. and there's plenty of my videos in the past where I've added seam allowance on, so hopefully you know how to do that already. If you're new to my videos, then have a look along probably at making Luna by machine. I think that'll probably be the best one, and when I talk about the pattern there, then I add seam allowance onto my pattern pieces, because the main Luna Lapin character is designed to be hand stitched, so therefore there is no seam allowance. But for my characters, then I like to machine stitch mine. So again, we've got another boot here, so I'm going to put this one right up in this top corner here and use this corner for mine. Make sure the edges are all together. To pin down this edge just to hold it together. Another one over here just to hold that together. And if you watch any of my videos before, you know that I don't always follow the layout given in the pattern, because I like to try and maximise as much fabric saved for another project, another day, as I can do. And that will just fit just nicely in there as well for the sole. And don't forget that when you look at this, you might think, oh, she's not been very generous with the felt. But don't forget that I've actually added 1/4 of an inch to all of my pattern pieces, so therefore I'm using up a lot more of the felt than you would do if you didn't have that attached onto your fabric pieces, onto your pattern pieces. So I'm just leaving that as a usable space and just putting this piece down here. So the hat we need to cut 2 out of, so we've got just 1 pattern piece for that because our fabric is double, so we'll automatically get 2 of that, a left and a right. The boots, we need 4 of those, so I've got 2 pattern pieces down for those. So I just traced an extra one, so I've got that laid down for me. And then the sole of the boot, I just need 2 of those, so I've just got 1 pattern piece again cut on the double. I've got my boot cuffs out the way and I've everything else, so that's all nice. So we can go ahead now and cut out this for the hat and the boots. And I know that we're working firstly on the boots, but I would always cut out my hat fabric at the same time, just so that I make sure that I've not jeopardised putting the boots in first and used up all of the felt or a piece of the felt that we might have needed for the hat at some stage. So whenever I'm cutting out 1 piece of fabric in a kit, use all of the pattern pieces that are going to use that fabric first, rather than save some for later, because it's just save any tears later. Okay, I'm just going to go off and cut these out. So if you want to get your spare boucle pieces, I've got a piece here and a piece here, and I'll probably work with this piece actually because that's quite a nice big piece. So I try and use my scraps up quite carefully, really, just so that I can get the most out of it. So just check your stretch and just see which way the stretcher goes, because you want the stretch going across your pattern pieces. I've got a boot cuff there, I've got a hat band there, and a second boot cuff there. Let's just make sure they're the right sizes. Yes, they are. So my hat band is going to fit nicely just down the bottom here, and I'll probably push it into as far along as I can, because that will give me a nice bit here that I can save. And we know how I like to try and conserve the fabric. So I'm pinning these pattern pieces onto the wrong side of the boucle, the oatmeal boucle. And that will allow me just to cut that out just nicely. And then if we get our cuff as well, I'm probably going to go right to the very top up here and use those pieces up first as well. So again, let's pop some pins into that piece to hold that in place. Make sure you don't cut off any corners, because you're going to need those. That one's just folded back for me, and that's it. And then I probably will put this next one underneath. No, probably next to it. So I've buttered those right up together so that when I do one snip down, it'll actually cut both out. Both sides of those out for me. Just make sure you're not pulling your fabric as you're pinning as well, so you don't want it to be stretched at all. You want it just to be lying naturally flat. And then this time, rather than use my rotary cutter, I'm just going to use my scissors and just snip through this. Save my pressing that. Okay, so the scraps of the fur go separately. And then I'm going to put my fur band with my boucle with my hat as well. So still got lots of fur. Okay, back to where I was. So let's get the boots together again now. And what we need to do is we've got right sides together anyway. That's the way that I cut mine out. And then so if we put some pins in just at right angles to this edge, we're going to sew this curved edge first. Now I'm sewing mine with my sewing machine, so I've got my right sides together. If you are sewing this by hand, the boots, and you don't want to sew it on a sewing machine, then you would have your right sides out and you'd be over stitching that top edge, wouldn't you? Just as you would do when you're making an ordinary Luna Lapin by hand and by felt. So I'm going to start here, reverse stitch here, all the way down around this curve here, and then I stop 1/4 inch from this bottom seam just on the toe edge. So on the toe edge I'll stop 1/4 inch up, but 1/4 inch seam allowance as well, or 1/2 centimetre all the way around there, and I'll be doing that on both of the boots. Okay, so I'll get that all set up, ready to go. I need to change my thread over and get this other one pinned, and I'll come back to you when I'm ready to sew. Okay, so machine set up, and I've just got my ordinary presser foot on because that's a good one for using with felt. I don't feel that we need to have the walking foot on like we did have for the boucle, but obviously that's a personal choice. And so I'm going to start at this point here and just 1/4 inch in, reverse at the bottom, and then sew all the way around here. And I'm going to move my needle across to my number 7 position, because I know then that my edge of my presser foot is my 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's worked really well while making these characters. So I'm about 1/4 inch in, couple of stitches up, couple of stitches back, and then needle in the works, because we're on a curve and we're going to need to start pivoting. So leave your needle in the work, lift up your presser foot, and just move your piece of felt just a little while you're just doing your stitches, and then just keep doing that in order to come round. Just make my pedal squeak, apologies for that if it's driving you nuts, but I can't stop it. So a couple more stitches round, and now I'm starting to head off, so I know I need to start and pivot again. So keep sewing round, and then adjust it, take that pin out. Don't go too fast because it'll send you off target. And then straighten it up, and then we can go up to the top. And just reverse at the top as well. Needle out of the work, and then we can then just snip off our threads. Have those out the way. That's how that's looking. So you can see I stopped about 1/4 inch down there, probably slightly more, but it'll be all right, I think. Okay, so I'm just going to sew the other one, and then we're going to be working with the boot cuffs, and we're going to attach the boot cuffs. Won't be a second. So we now need to take the contrast cuff, and we need to attach the right side of the cuff to the wrong side of the boot. So I've got my seam allowance open there, and I'm just going to attach that with a pin on the top here. Let me just bring my pins round because that'll be easier, won't it? So there's a pin going in the top just there, and I keep my pin heads out so that I can sew it from either side. And then I'm going to go to the other side of the boot, and I'm just going to attach that pin just at the other end of the boot. Oops, going in pin. And then into the middle, making sure your seam allowance is open, and pin that onto that section there as well. Because when we've sewn this, we're going to flip the boot cuff round to the other side of to the right side of where we've sewn, so that's why we're putting the right side to the wrong side on our boot. So let's do the other one again. So let's open that up, open up our seam allowance, and then the right side of the cuff is going to the wrong side of the boot. Pin in to hold the first bit, go right across to the other side first, so we've got that all lined up and they're all matching. And then making sure your seam allowance is staying open, go to the middle. Just make sure you've got equal amounts either side, and then another pin in the middle there. Then we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm probably going to sew with the boucle on top. I will sew with the boucle on top because I can manage that a little bit better then, and the felt should move nicely against the feed dogs anyway. So I've still got red thread on. I'll have my awl because I might need that. So then let's just pop this underneath here. We're on a quarter of an inch seam allowance anyway, so that's fine. A couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work. Take the first pin out. Oh, see, I've moved my pin cushion and I couldn't find it. And then I'll use the awl because that's quite easy for you to see, and then start and just sew across this, just with a straight stitch. Just make sure nothing starts to bunch up. And just make sure you keep to your quarter of an inch seam allowance, and then reverse it at the end as well. And we can actually chain stitch these, can't we? So let's lift up the other, press the foot, just pop the other one underneath, reverse it before I start, and stop, and then pin out. And pin out. I've noticed I keep sticking my little finger out when I'm sewing. I do apologise, a bit like drinking a cup of tea, isn't it, with your finger out? So I'm trying not to do it, but it's a kind of an automatic thing. So it just made me smile when I was watching some videos back the other day. I was doing it. You might all have noticed before me. Okay, there we go. That's us. Take off our ending threads, take off those middle ones, and take off these starting threads. So now what we need to do is we need to now flick the boot cuff over. I'm going to leave this bit of the seam on the inside because that's quite a deep cuff on there, and then I'm just going to put our pins in again, holding that in place, and you're trying to make sure that your cuff is pretty even all the way along. And again, just make sure your seam allowance is open on your boot as you're going along. I'm just holding it open with my fingers just whilst I pin. There we go. Let's do the other one. So again, I'm going to flick this cuff now over. So I've got the seam allowance just on the inside there, just on the edge. And I'm pinning with my pin heads into the boot, because sometimes if you pin them with the pin heads into the boucle, sometimes you can't see them quite so well. Okay, then seam allowance open, and then again put the pin in just to hold that in the middle. So that's what that's looking like. So that's the curve of the boot. When we turn that round and turn that out, we've got to just clip that. We'll use our pinking shears on there in a minute. So now we're going to use a zigzag, and the zigzag has got to actually start down the sides here and then across the back, because this back zigzag here, the back of the boot, stays open. So yeah, it just depends whether I want to sew that on with the white rather. No, it'll cover it, won't it? As we said before, it covers it, doesn't it? So and also we don't want to have the white thread showing on the inside like we did on the inside of the coat when I did that with the thing. So we're using our red thread again. We're going to sew now across here, but when we get to this section here, just make sure you've got your seam allowance open and you're not kind of catching any of the foot underneath of your boot, the foot part of your boot. So let's take it onto a zigzag stitch. Down to my settings, you probably know what these are now. 2.5 width and a 2 length. And I'm going to have my boot to this side, to boot to the left. And we've got to start along that edge, haven't we, first? So let's... Ooh, didn't like that. No, I need to just... Oh, we've got a right nest going on there. I wonder why it didn't like that. Just pick those threads out. Interesting. Let's have a go and just see again. Sort of threading right. So let's just go down this way first and just see if we can get that done. So I'm just going to do down the side edges of the boot first. I've just reversed. So it's kind of held that in place on there, look. So it worked that time, didn't it, for me? Let's try the other side. I'm going to pull that out to make sure it's on the edge. Where's my board? I hope. It's a bit messier, but I'm hoping that we can cover that when we get to that one's a little bit messier, but I'm hoping we can cover that. That one's just gone off at the top. Is it going to be okay? I think so, because that'll be down towards the ground, won't it? So you won't see it. But if you wanted to go back, if you do the same and you want to go back and just alter yours, then feel free to do so. And then now, I'm going to now reverse at the start and stop again. Needle in our work and first pin out. So I've got my toes of my boot pushed towards me at the moment. So let's just keep sewing that down. When you come to take out your middle pin, just lift up your presser foot. Just make sure that seam allowance is still open. Mine's folded closed. So we want that just to be nice. And I'm also pushing my foot now to the back. So can you see the curve of the foot is now poking out at the back? And then I'm going to sew over this edge, making sure we catch the edge of the boot plate. And then slip that off. So the seam allowance has been sewn open, which is great. And then we've got our cuff here. Now, it is going to be imperative that we can pull this fluff out to cover these stitches over the back here, just because I think it is a bit messy where that red thread is. And again, when we come down here again, we can just pull that fur out over the top of the stitches, and it will cover it quite well, as you can see. So there's where I've pulled it out, and there's where I haven't. So it makes a huge difference. Definitely worth taking the time to do that. And we can just extra fluff that up on the edge there, just so that it's covering up those red stitches, and I'll trim that red thread just there as well, because I don't need that just there. Just be careful you're not cutting any of your fur off, because you want to keep your fur for disguising your seam. Okay, so if you get yours to the same stage, fluff your fur out so that that's all nice, because we don't sew that bit up together. When we sew these in the round next time, we're going to put those two boot cuffs together, and we're just going to sew down this section just here, so that he has like a little flip open bit at the back of his boots. Can you see? Okay. So that's how that goes. So once you've got both your fur trims on your boots, then you're going to put your shoes together again, and you're going to match up your bottom of your heel and the bottom of the cuff. So one pin in it when you've got both of your bottom of your cuffs together. Oops, pin through. And then one pin when you've got your at the bottom here. And I'm going to sew to 1/4 inch away from the bottom here as well. Remember to put your stitch back onto your straight stitch first. And because we've changed stitches, I now need to readjust my needle position as well to be at that edge, so that we get the 1/4 inch. Nearly forgot to leave my 1/4 inch, but remember, just in time. It's just a really small seam, this one is, isn't it? And that's what mine's looking like. So it's open at the bottom just there. Yeah. And then it's open here at the back of the cuff as well, and I'll neaten that fur up. Okay, let me do the other one, and then we'll be on to attaching the sole in. Okay, so take one of your boots. I've it still inside out at the moment, and you're just going to spread that seam allowance along the bottom, just how you've left it open 1/4 inch, because that's going to correspond with the 1/4 inch extra on the bottom of this sole of these shoes. And I did this for Florin, and it worked really well, so I'm hoping for a similar result. So I had right sides together, so let me just put a pin on this one, because I remember that that's my right side. Okay, So right sides together again. So I'm going to turn my sole over so the right side is in, and then on one side you're going to match the point of the sole, so this point here. Can you see? I don't know if the light's particularly good, it's difficult to see sometimes. And then to the edge of the boot itself. So can you see I've folded one seam allowance out the way just there, and then just to one seam allowance I'm just going to attach that in and put a pin at the end just to hold that together. And then I'm going to go to the other side of the sole where we've got our straight edge, and just before it starts to curve back again I'm going to attach that section raw edges together with the back of the heel as well. So that's how it's looking. So I've just attached one pin at the back there and one pin at the front here, and I'm just going to do one side at a time because otherwise we'll have too many pins. So keeping the second part of the sole that we're not working with at the moment, let's just pin this in place along this edge. And they're not as curvy as Luna's feet pads, so that they are slightly easier, although they're narrow, they are slightly easier to get in. So that's how that looks just there, and you can see the edge of the boot, the other edge of the boot just sticking out here. So making sure that you kind of pull it out, because you sort of tuck in the sole inside the boot, and you want your seam allowance to open. And I'm going to stitch, in actual fact I'll stitch it from the other side, I'll stitch it from the top because we can then see that seam allowance much easier, can't we? So the seam allowances are there. Oops. So 1/4 of an inch seam allowance again, got it pinned in place. So let's do a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then needle in the work because we're going to be doing some pivoting. Take the first pin out because that's all in place, and you just wanted to make sure that the raw edges of your boot that you're sewing are staying together. And then we're going to take some stitches round, maintaining our seam allowance. Just pivot and change direction if you need to. Make sure you keep the other side of the boot out of the way because we don't want to get that caught in underneath by mistake. Pin out, and again you can just lift the presser foot up and just move some of the fullness of the boot out of the way. Took that little bit back there, that's it. And then there's a little bit of a curve around the back of the boot as you come to kind of join where the stitches were for the seam allowance anyway. We cut off the starting threads and I'll show you what we've got. So that's what it looks like when it's stitched on one side. So I did a little bit of a curve back round the heel and then back up here, and it's got a little curve to the front. Now what we can do is pull out the sole from the bottom, and we're now trying to match up the back of this sole to the raw edges as best as we can again. Put some pins in. You try not to get any puckers in the sole of your shoe. The front toe end is already anchored down, so we can just put a pin further down. And then again we're wanting to finish, so where the stitches are there we want to kind of finish the stitching of that sole there. So it does get a bit thick under that section there, but we can do it. So let's put a pin first where that starts to curve because that'll keep that curve right. And then I'm just going to pull that felt. So I'm pulling the other, can you see the other toe? I'm kind of putting a pleat in that just to pull it out of the way so that the rest of it is flat against the sewing machine bed. I'm going to sew from the top, aren't I? So we're going to start from the back, but you could see what I was doing with the bottom edge of that. So join your stitches again where the other one's finished at the back of that seam allowance. Needle in your work and take that first pin out. A little bit of a curve on the back of that heel. To your next pin. Just make sure that you're just moving any fullness back if you can. And then when we get into this section here, because we're going to need your awl if you can, and we're just trying to make sure that that toe has some shape. So you're sort of pulling the other section of your boot here. If I just lift my presser foot up, you can pull the other section of the boot out of the way of where you're stitching, so that you're not going to stitch any of that fullness in or catch any of the other side of the boot at the same time. And then I'm curving round at the front towards where those other stitches are, where we finished before. So what you're trying to aim for is that both the front and the back, I've not quite managed it there, but we can always hand stitch that a bit, is that your stitches match, and that you're kind of, so there's better, can you see how the stitches kind of match straight up there? So you're trying to pincer that seam allowance in the middle with your stitching. I didn't quite join together at the bottom there. There's a bit of a gap. But I think that when we turn these round, it'll be okay. So I'm going to get my pinking shears first and just do some pinking on the edge of this. But if you wanted to as well, you could just use your snips and just take out some little triangles out of your felt of that seam, because we want that to lie nice and flat. Or you can use pinking shears, which are just slightly quicker. Just be careful you don't catch it. It's just on that toe edge. This bit here should be fine. So then we're going to then pull the sides of the boot apart. Might take off a little bit of that bulk at the end there, just a little bit of the seam allowance, just so that that toe can just go nicely. And then let's just pop that toe back in on itself. Just use your finger just to push it through. And then once it's started to go through, we'll be able to grab it and pull it through. I do like the neater effect that it gives by them being machine sewn, but if you like the hand sewn look, then there's nothing wrong with hand sewing these boots. The steps are pretty much the same, but you'd be sewing yours from the right side, whereas I'm sewing mine from the inside. So let's just use a pin just gently, just to ease out our toes and that extra fabric. There we go. That curve seam's sitting nicely. Oops, it's alive. Right. I feel like the elf and the shoemaker, you know that story, that ladybird story, where they were sewing. The elves were coming out at night and helping the shoemaker. I don't know if I'm the elf or the shoemaker though, that's the only thing. Right, and then at the back here again, that's where I had that little gap, so I just need to be aware of that, because I can always put a few stitches in just to hand stitch that at the back there if I need to. But it's pretty much staying in quite nicely. So there's one boot. Where's Florin? Let's try it on him, shall we? Should wait to the end, but I'm a bit impatient. Oh, let's just fluff out the fur first. There we go. So now let's take Florin's foot. Yep, toes are going in. Just help his heel in a little bit. Toes are going up to the end, that's good, they fit. And yeah, they're going right up to the bottom of his bloomers, look. Look at that. So there you've got the little cuff that opens up at the back, look. Just so you can see that. That's how it should be. That's how it's designed. And there he's looking. So I'm just going to repeat the other boot exactly the same way, and maybe do a little bit of extra fluffing up, just because I was impatient to get it onto him. But we'll put his other boot on and then we'll be ready to start on his hat. So here's Pere with his two boots on, very nicely all sewn. The cuffs are quite even. That's quite good, and his lovely coat. So let me get on with doing his hat next. That's the next step that we're going to be working on. Okay, so let's get our two hat pieces. We've got right sides together anyway, and let's just notice where the seam allowances are. Not the seam allowances are, sorry, the notches are. So I want you to cut into the notches as far as the seam allowance depth is, your 1/4 inch. And this is something I learned from doing Florin's hat. So we've got two on either side, and this is for Pere's ears to stick out of. But they need to be slightly deeper than you would normally do a notch, because what we're going to do next is when we take off this pattern piece, is on each side, I've just separated them just for a moment, just take off that seam allowance, just follow the curve of the hat at that point and just take out that seam allowance. It's easier to cut it out now than it is before, so you're having your pieces look like that. Make sure you've got you know which is your right side and your wrong side. And again this side, let's take that out. There's just a slight curve, so just don't snip it straight off. You want to just keep to that curve. Okay, and then right sides together, put those two pieces of felt back right sides together, because now we're going to sew in between these pieces. Put a pin just down the centre of that long pointy bit. For his hat, oh, pins don't want to go through my felt. And then I'm keeping the pin heads in towards the centre of the project, so it's a bit like that. Okay, so off to the sewing machine once you've got rid of your little piece of felt that you don't need anymore. Keep your patting piece safe as well. And then sew in a 1/4 inch seam allowance with a straight stitch. Yep, we're going to just stitch along the bottom here. Needle in the work so we can take our pin out. Up to the edge of that, where that seam allowance is, keep into the curve. Just stitch there, and then we're going to just take our needle out, jump across that gap, and then start stitching again on the other side of that seam allowance. And just reverse back just to stitch that. And then avoiding the pin down the centre, but making sure that your pointed end stays together. Where's my org? I'm going to use that. Oh, I've got fluff from my face again. Needle in your work so that we can pivot, and we're going to start and pivot around this curve. So just stop every now and again and just readjust your felt. Now, because of the direction of the felt, we're going to have to just be careful going into the top corner. So I tend to do 1 stitch across the top corner and then start to then pivot coming down the other side. Oh, just less than my seam allowance there, just be careful with that. And again I'm going to reverse just one side of the ear opening, and then needle out, and then join my threads again the other side of the ear opening, and reverse stitch again. Let's stop and take that pin out, and then to the edge, and then reverse at the edge as well. Ooh, snips have disappeared over there. Right, I'll show you how this looks in a second. So you can see my threads spanning across that gap just there. They can just come off now. Just saves a little bit of thread, doesn't it? It's not much, but might as well. You can stop and start completely if you want to, that's fine too. Okay, and so that's what it looks like. So you can see the stitch line here and going up into this point and then down the other side. What I want to do is trim off the seam allowance at the top pretty much, just not all the way, but we need to have this as narrow as possible for turning out at the top. And then as it starts to get wider, we can just put some snips in if we want to, or just do some triangles and take out some of that seam allowance, just so that that edge can curve in on itself quite nicely without all of that bulk in place. And again on the outside here, just use my pinking shears, that'll be quicker, while I'm showing you, and then just take off the bulk of that seam allowance. You can do the same down here if you wish to as well. That just looks like that. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do then is we are going to, should we turn it around now? No, we'll leave it for a second or two because I'm thinking out loud, sorry, as you could probably hear. So let's take our Pere Hiver band for a hat band, and what we're going to do now is going to put our wrong sides together. And what I want you to do is just take a little snip, so just like 1/2 centimetre off one edge, going to nothing at the back. So make sure that you do the same orientation of the snip, so 1/4 inch on the one side, So it's just giving us a bit of a slant on that edge like that. And then I want you to take that to the sewing machine and sew it on the slant. I'm going to use my red thread because it has hidden it quite well. And I'm not changing over to my walking foot just for this small amount. But I can guarantee that with a walking foot that boucle sews a lot nicer. So you can see that from the slant that this edge here is slightly shorter than this edge here. Okay, so when we turn it round, we're going to attach that seam allowance there, and we're going to have the right, so we're going to poke so if you have the narrower part pointing down to you and the wider part at the top, poke the point of your hat down into that hat band. Open up your hat and open up the seam allowance on this edge here. And then this boucle is going to attach onto the hat just like this. And because it's got a bit of stretch to it, then we can stretch it. So you've got the right side of the boucle to the wrong side of your hat. Oh, pins don't want to go in again. And now what we're going to do is just by stretching that boucle slightly, is we're just going to attach that onto the top of the hat. Try and tuck your fur down inside if you can do, so you preserve all of that fluffiness for going on your hat and for covering that edge up. And I've got my pin heads coming out to the open edge of the hat. When you get to the other side, just open up your seam allowance again on that edge. Let's just tuck that fur in. Just use the edge of your quick unpick, or I'm using my awl, and you can just tuck that fur in so that it's available for us to fluff out afterwards. You're just going to go all the way around doing that. It's going to be a little bit fiddly to sew, and if you want to hand sew this bit, you can do. I'll have a go with mine on the machine and see how we get on. Okay, so there's the boucle, and so the right side of the boucle is the wrong side of the hat. And now, being very careful, I'm going to kind of push that so that the edge of the hat is sort of lying flat, if you can see. So I've just pushed it so it looks like that. And then I'm going to start at one side, and I'm sewing with the boucle up, first pin out and 1/4 inch seam allowance. By keeping my hand on the top of the section here, just turn that way if you can, and then I can then see the edge of everything going round here, so I can know that I'm needling the work, just so that we can pivot if we need to. And so I'm following the edge of the mesh really, and I'm relying that I've got my pins in the right place. And I'm kind of anchoring the hat down with this hand, because that then makes it easier for me to spin this round without having to pivot all the time. Lift that up and just get the bulk of the hat out of the way so that it's easier for me to sew. And pin out. We're getting round towards the beginning again, so let's just flip that up and just take the bulk of the hat out of the way so it's nice and as flat as we can get it. Let's tuck that fur in. The edge of the boucle is wanting to curl outwards, so just tuck it in and just use your awl or your quick unpick head just to hold that in place. And then just reverse at the end and take these threads out. This one, there's the other, so that went okay. So now I'm going to turn the hat the right way round. first. So let's tuck that in, and we're going to just need to be really careful whilst we're just easing out the end of the, I'll use the end of my of my awl, I think, just to hopefully push that out a little bit easier, if it'll work. No, I'm just going to have to just do it nice and steady with this. Start to see your stitches on the end, you know that you've got there, and just remember you've got your curve at the end as well. So a little bit more, we're nearly there. Just felt quite a big bit come out then. Okay. Right, we're there. So we've got a nice curve on the top there anyway, look, for a bell to go on to. And then the next thing that we're going to do now is we're going to flip this trim to the outside. So again, let's find the edge of our trim and our raw edge of our mesh. And I'm going to hand stitch this on because this is going to be too tiny to go into the machine, I believe anyway. The other thing that I wondered about is, can you remember we put a little bit of trim onto Florin's hat, and we have got a bit of the ribbon left. So I might well hand stitch that on using just a small running stitch as well once I've got this trim on here. So I'll go through first and tack this trim on, this oatmeal boucle trim on first, making sure that's all fine. Oh, bless you, that's my husband. So there we go, that's his hat as it is looking at the moment with that trim all poked out. So I'm just going to go through now and just hand stitch that on, that trim on, and then if I've got enough ribbon, I might well just slot a little bit of ribbon just in the back there and then hand stitch that on. And yes, I have got enough ribbon to do that. So let me go ahead and do that. So as I say, I'll just use some thread and just do a little back stitch, I think, just along here. Do you know what a back stitch is? Do you want to see me do some of it? You get a hand sewing needle and thread that up. And I'll need my glasses as well because we'll be working close up. I'll do it double, using red thread because that's what we've used all the way through, isn't it? Quarter's knot on the end, just to give that a nice knot. My glasses. Right, let's have a look and see. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to bury my knot in my seam allowance. I'm going to have a look and see roughly where that trim is. And I'm going to put my needle into my felt and come out on the edge. Now the reason why we did that slanted seam on the edge of the pattern band, can you remember we kind of went in just 1/4 of an inch on one part to nothing on the other, and that just gave us that little edge, because then when we sewed those two together it meant that this top edge was shorter than the bottom edge. And that's accounted for the curve in the hat, because this edge here is longer than this edge here. So I'm going to just keep my fingers inside. I'm going to just fold the fur out the way so I can see the mesh edge, just like when we were sewing with our machine. And I'm just going to start and take a little stitch. And in a back stitch, you take one stitch forward, and then you go back to where you came out before, and then you move forward. So you're almost like over stitching, double stitching the half of a stitch backwards all the time. So can you see my threads in the middle there? And then I'm where my needle is going in behind it and coming out in front of it. And that's called a back stitch. I'm just making sure to catch the mesh and trying not to catch too much of the fur. Or the boucle really, isn't it? So we'll just keep going around like that on here, and that will then attach the fur at the top edge and keep it in one place for us. If you want to use the oatmeal colour thread, you can do, but I do believe that once you fluff this up you really won't see those red stitches at all. But again, your choice. So here's Pere's hat all finished with the little holes for his ears. Got a little bit of felt in there. Right, and so I've left the needle attached at the moment just because I want to just try this on him before I decide whether or not we're going to use the fur trim or not for the ribbon trim. And I think it will add something nice to it. So I haven't fluffed out my fur yet, and I haven't added the little bell to the top as yet. But I think that possibly with that, we'll just sort of put it in place like that on the top of there. We'll just tie that in nicely. And as I said when we were making florin, I've got the ribbon anyway, it's just spare, and I'm not sure what I would actually use this piece of ribbon for. So I think that that actually will just look really nice just attached onto there. So let's take this off for you a minute. You're not quite ready finished yet, Pere. And also we need to do his beard, don't we? So I'm going to snip off the ribbon at an angle, and I'm going to fold it back at an angle to where that we've not got a circle, and then you get a little edge at the end, and I'm going to tuck that up before I offer that up to the side where I've just finished stitching the ribbon, because that will take out some of the excess in the top. Oh, I've taken my glasses off. Let me just get my glasses again. And then I'm going to sew that folded edge, keep that edge in the out of the way, to the folded edge of the hat anyway. Just take a few stitches up, and it's finishing just at the bottom of his ears actually, so that's pretty good. And then I'm just going to travel back down again with my thread. So I've just attached it just there, look. I'm just going to travel back down with my thread to this bottom edge, because I want to attach the bottom edge first. Just push it on because the ribbon's quite thick, quite stiff. Okay, so just make sure you don't tuck that in by pulling the thread too tight. And then I'm going to do what we did before on florins, but obviously we're doing it by hand now. And I'm just going to do a little overstitch into that red edge. In fact, if I snip one of my threads, so we've just got it single, because we don't really need it, it's not got any pressure on it at all. So let's just do a stitch again. So I'm going into the boucle over the edge of the boucle, and then I'm just coming out through the edge of the ribbon, and that should just give me a nice invisible stitch that will just go over the edge of that boucle. So that's just getting that on nice and neat just there. And I'm just going to go all the way round and do that. And then when I come to the end, I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to fold back a bit of the ribbon and tuck it under, and then I will stitch the two edges of the ribbon together. So you have got a join of the ribbon if you're wanting to do this. Obviously you don't need to do this bit if you don't want to. But I'm joining the two bits of the end of the ribbon together in effect. And that should then just make that nice and neat. And then I will then go round and just tack down the top of the ribbon to the hat as well. That's my plan that we're making up on the hoof as we go along. So just don't let your ribbon get too loose, because it needs to be just slightly tight if anything, because you've got that big curve at the top, and I'm hoping we don't have to put any tucks in the ribbon, but we might have to when we come to sewing it down. But the felt does stretch slightly. Just make sure the end of your boucle is going underneath your felt as you're going round, because mine's trying to poke out. So it'll cover that raw edge, won't it, as well? And we can always just put some pressure on the felt just to stretch it slightly if we need to. So I haven't trimmed mine off before I've got round, so I'm stitching it on, and then I'll trim off that tiny bit at the end. But that way I make sure that I've not miscalculated with the ribbon at all as we're going round. So get in there. And it is literally just to catch it on, really. Right, we're coming to the end there now, so I can kind of see where the end is. So I'm going to just cut off the other side of this dot, so that should hopefully keep those and I'm going to cut it at an angle again. So I'm going from the wide part at the bottom of the hat up to the top, and then I can just fold over that edge and tuck in those raw bits, and it should just match up to the end. Oops, and my needle's come unthreaded. Typical. So back to where we were, fold over the edge of the ribbon, tuck in those gold threads that I want him to poke out. I'm going to put my finger inside his ear slit, and then that will allow me to just tuck in the folded edge of the ribbon as well, where it's just, you see there's a little ear of ribbon just there, and I can just tuck that in behind so that that ribbon matches up together nicely, and a couple of stitches in place. And now I'm at the end. I'm now going to go through one side of the ribbon that we first started with and attach the two ribbon pieces together. Oops, hands are getting hot. That's it. So the ribbon's quite hard to sew through by hand. You might need a thimble on. Just try and do little stitches, and luckily the thread colour I've chosen is a really good match for the ribbon and the felt. So that's sewing up to the top there. So that's how that's looking after the first pass, and that's my join just there. And then now I'm going to just take little stitches just through the top. Just do a little running stitch along the red edge of the felt, red edge of the ribbon. And that will just hold that invisibly down. By just putting that ribbon on the slant at the join, it just takes out a little bit of the fullness that you might have otherwise on that hat edge, on the ribbon edge, so that you don't have to put any little tucks into it. And then I'll find the bell and we'll stitch the bell on. And then we're on to the beard, and then he's done. And you can give yourself a pat on the back for all your hard work. If you're not a subscriber to my channel, then I would appreciate it. I know everybody keeps saying that all the time, but it is lovely to know people are out there, that they've enjoyed what they've watched. There we go. Because the videos take quite a long time to make, because you have your sewing time, then you have all of the editing time, during which, so whatever the video is, it's even longer to then edit it, because you have to watch it and just make sure that you don't want to take any bits out, or that you're not repeating yourself too much, which is what I often do. So I'm around the other side now, so let's just poke the needle through into the inside, and then we can attach just cast off those threads onto the side here. And then once you've actually got it edited, you then have to do something called rendering a video, and then you have to upload it. So and then you have to write all your titles and your descriptions, and then you have to promote it. So there's quite a lot of work involved. So if you don't mind just hitting subscribe, I really do appreciate it. Okay, so that's all on there, so let's snip that thread off. So there's the hat now. So now I can go round with my awl or quick unpick, and I'll just fluff up the edge of the fur, the boucle, just to get that so that that's all nice and covers over the edge of just gives that nice fluffy kind of look, doesn't it, to it all. Was anybody else shouting at the screen to say, Claire, you've forgotten his bell? Because I nearly had forgotten. So let's take I've got a needle threaded with the red thread, and now I'm just going to go in through an ear hole, because I'm going to try and bury the knot inside. So I'm just trying to travel down inside the hat as best as I can to the very end, and then just push that through. Just make sure you're not catching through the outside. If it's a struggle for you, then just join at the edge. And then I've been in my haberdashery kit, and I've got out the little bell. And if you look on the little bell, there's a little loop just at the top here where you can attach that. Is my needle going to go through? Yes, just. Right, okay. So now I've got my thread through, so let's just do another stitch in place just to hold the thread in there, through there, and then I'm going to go through the little hanger on the bell and then through the top of the hat. So don't try and go through the hanger of the bell at the same time as going through the top of the hat, because I think you have to do it in 2 stages. Just make sure you don't get any loops in your threads as you're sewing. After this we'll be on to the, sorry, did that make you jump? After this we'll be on to the sewing the beard on, because then the hat will finally be complete. Come out that side. Just make sure your bell's going to hang down just nicely. And I've got a loop in my thread, look, so I'll just separate the 2 threads, pull on them, and then one should pull through. That's it, got it. Then back through the end of the hat again, and then back through the little hanger. Just do that 5 or 6 times, or as many times as you feel you need. If a child's going to be playing with your bell, which, you know, these aren't designed for children's toys, they are designed just to be decorative. But if you just put so if you've got grandchildren who might play with them, or any friends' children or anything, then you need to make sure that they're really securely sewn on. Then I'm just going to do a couple of stitches without going through the bell, because the bell's now on securely, just to neaten off those threads. And then I'm going to poke my needle back in through the hat and then come out a little way down, and that'll give us a nice long end then, so it doesn't start to come unthreaded. So there we go. So now the hat's finished, and I've fluffed this out quite a bit, and now I'm going to get his fabric for his fur before I put the hat on, because I know I want to put his beard on before the hat. So let me get the fur for the beard out of my haberdashery bag, and then we'll be able to try that on later. Okay, so I've been in my haberdashery pack. Now we've still got some fur left of the white for Mary's skirt and for Florin's outfit, but I think that's a little bit too dense and short piled, because in the haberdashery kit there is a longer piled beard fur. It's not quite as nice quality, but it's got a much longer pile, and I think that's probably the one that is intended for Pere's beard. So the other thing that I've got now is I'm going to cut out, I'm just going to measure this, as I've got Pere here, and I'm just going to measure and see how that's going to fit. So it goes under his nose and then out to the side. Okay, so that's fine. So I'm not going to add anything or make that any smaller. And I just want to make sure that when we cut this out, the pile of the fur is going down, because we want that to go down for when we're sewing it onto his face. So I'm going to turn it this way, so I'm working on the back, and then we've just got enough to cut out a beard for Pere Hiver from this fur. So make sure you've got a nice straight edge at the top. Let's pop a couple of pins in, because we might, oh, that's a bent one, that's not good, because then that will just help that stay in place whilst we cut through all of this. Make sure that your edge is up against your edge, and again this stretches a bit, so just make sure that it's sitting nicely for you. There you go. So keep your raw edges up there, and then you're going to use the point of your scissors to then go along the edge and just part through the fur, because you want the fur pile to be left, and you're just going through the mesh background. Can you see the mesh background there, and then the faux furs there? So you're kind of parting, but you don't want to lose that corner, so just part through the fur with your scissors. Embroidery scissors are perfect for this, I'm just using my snips. You want something with a nice sharp point so that it can then split. Can you see how you've got the overhang of the fur just there over the edge of where you've cut when you separate it, and that's what we want. So I'm just cutting around this edge of this beard. Just making sure that where possible we keep as much of the actual fur fibres overhanging, because that's going to hide our stitches, you see. Can you see how it's hanging over the edge, even though I've cut on the line? we go. So there's the fluffy bit at the edge. Now we have to take the pattern piece off. And there's our piece cut out with the fur hanging down over the edge. Right, so the next section then, I don't know if it says about how to sew Pere's beard on. Just have a quick look and see on Pere. Beard for Pere Hiver, completely optional. So cut the beard shape from the hair, position below the nose so the edges come to about 1 centimetre below the centre of the eye button, slip stitch the top edge onto the face along the top edge. So we've got quite a big mesh edge on there, so I think I'm going to do mine slightly different. Not going to surprise you to saying that is. I'm going to attach mine that way up and then slip stitch along here, and then I'm going to then fold it back down so it gives it a bit of a neater edge on the end here. Okay, that's my theory anyway. Let's see how it goes. So what I want to do first is mark the centre of the piece of fur. So let's put the pointed edges together, and that's going to give us a little point to put a pin in, so we can just match that. And that bit there has got to go right under his nose, and then the beard is supposed to finish about 1 centimetre down from his eyes. So let's go onto his eyes, from the bottom edge of his eyes, the centre of the eye buttons. Right, okay, so let's put the measure on the centre of his eye button, and sorry Pere, you're going to have a pin. So that's about there. And then let's go to this side here and put another pin in this side as well. So that's going to give us, just like to make sure that it's even on both sides. So now what I'm going to do is flip the beard upside down, make sure the pile wherever possible is sort of pointing downwards. In fact, I'm going to take his coat off just for doing this. Let's get down to surgery and business. So let's centre of his nose, and that's that seam allowance. Let's just pop this beard and just put a little pin just through there. And then where we've got the pin for the bottom of his eye, I'm going to just fold in that corner of the edge, and I'm just going to put the pin through the bottom of the fur just there. And the same this side. So I'm just folding over the outside edge of the beard, just folding that in just to give us a neat edge, and then putting the pin back in again. So that's how he's looking at the moment. He can't breathe very well, can he? Feels like I did the other day when I was working on all the fur. Now I've got a single length of thread, and I've got a knot at the end. And I'm just going to take a stitch through his face. Let me leave my glasses on again. Put your legs down, Peg, because that'll help me. I'm going to so I'm starting at one edge of his face, and I've just put one stitch in. So I'm just going to do a bit of a back stitch just to hold this edge of the fur in, and I'm going to catch down the pointed end of his beard at the same time. Once you've got a few stitches in, you can take that pin out because that's finished, that's done its job now. And that then should hold all of that edge on together. So that's just looking like that. Then I'm going to turn him the right way round now. And then I'm going to start and do a back stitch by taking through the fur, oh, put your hand down, putting the fur going through the edge of that fur. So I'm kind of just going up 1/8 of an inch really from the edge of the mesh, and then attaching that and doing a little seam, little back stitch, just holding that raw edge down. Can you see? So I'm not stretching the beard at all. Just coming up towards the centre point. So that's anchored down now, so I can take that pin out. And now we're coming round here. So his actual throat area is free of any beard at the moment, isn't it? if you look on yours as well, yours should be the same. Oops, just pulled the pin out. But I can see the mark where it was, so I'm going to put it back in again. Then we get close to the edge just here. I'll take that pin out and turn him upside down again so that I can catch the edge of this one in. Yeah, it's working. If you don't mind the raw edge, then you can just do yours the other way round. The way that Sarah says in the book. But I didn't want that raw edge just showing up. Oh, just got a bit of fluff, look. Let me just take that out with my needle. Just make sure you're going through the character's head as well as the faux fur. I'm just working our way back in towards the middle again, just so that we've got somewhere to anchor that. So then when we put that down, look, we can then pull out some of this fur off this edge, and that makes his beard extra fluffy, look. But I've not got a raw edge for that fur. Can you see if I fold that back? You've got a folded edge for that raw edge instead, because your raw edge is tucked under here. And I think that what I might do then, depending on whereabouts am I stopped, I'm now going to take my needle in and come out on the edge of his beard and then fold it down, and I'm just going to take a few stitches down along his cheek. So if we fold the fur out the way best we can, and I'm just going to attach the beard edge, bottom edge, to the side of his face. That's the side of the beard. So I'm attaching this part here of the pattern, if you remember how that was, this part here down, probably just to about there. So I'll leave this bottom bit free, but I just want to attach either side, just so that it gives it a little bit of coverage and just holds it down, and it doesn't then flick up at any stage whilst it's on display. Just use your needle point just to pull out any fur threads if you need to. Say it's not going all the way down, but it's just oops, hand's getting in the way, but just to neaten that edge off as much as possible. Okay, once I've done that, I'm just going to take a couple of big stitches underneath the beard, one coming out in the middle, so I just want to travel across to the other side without breaking my thread off. Oops, can you? I can't see, can you? Sorry. So I've travelled through into the middle here now, just with one stitch, and then I'm going to do the same coming out here with one stitch on the other side, and then I'm going to fold that beard down. Tuck the edge just in to make sure that's all nicely hidden. Fold the faux fur fibres back, and then just do a couple of stitches just to try and neaten this off down this side and just attach the beard to his cheeks. Oops. And this bit is actually optional, isn't it? Really, if you, I mean, Sarah just says just attach it under his nose and to the point just under his eyes. But I just wanted mine just tidying up a little bit more. As I say, we can pull out those fibres just to make it really nice and fluffy beard for him. When you're sewing on the top here, it's easy to catch the fibres as you're sewing. Just a couple of back stitches in place, then we'll just hold that in place. And then I'll do a long thread just underneath, just under his chin, back towards the middle, and that'll just bury that thread then for me. might just do a couple of stitches just in case I catch it when I'm smoothing his fur out. Yeah, that'll hold it and it'll hide that stitch. Right, so snip that off. Put my needle out of the way so I don't lose that inside pair. Put his beard pattern piece away. So here we go. So that's how Pere's beard is looking. Just use my awl just to pull out some of those fibres just from that edge. Make his beard as lovely and bushy as possible. Just kind of comb it down a bit. Take off some of the spare fibres. He's got a lot of fibres on his arms from the boucle inside the jacket. But let's now get you dressed again, Pere. Santa. And see how you're looking. It's got a thread on the back there. So arms in first. I think I will need the lint roller on Pere as well, just to get any fibres and what have you off him. There's the other arm. And then I'm just going to lift his beard up just so that that sits over the top of the centre of his jacket. That's how he's looking, just like that. That's quite nice, doesn't it? And then his hat can go on top. Let's poke his ears through. Can you hear the little bell? And then the other one. Just over the back of his head. Just his ears so that they look like they're coming out nicely. Wow, look at him. Isn't he just the nicest thing? Yeah, I think I'll be picking fur off for a while, but I really like him with his hat on, and I like that I put the ribbon on on the edge there as well. So hopefully you like him too. He's got his wonderful boots on with his feet, and yeah, he's looking super smart. So I'll turn the camera around and we'll have a roundup and we'll have a bit of a chat. And so here is Pere in all his glory. He's got his lovely hat with the lovely little bell on the end, ribbon trim, the fur, his lovely beard, his fabulous coat, his bloomers and his shoes, and he's all ready now and all finished. So I'm really, really happy with him. And I hope that you are too if you've been sewing along. We've also got Mary joining us as well today, and the jury's out whether or not I actually make her some slippers at some stage as well, which I might well do, but not for the purposes of this video. I think I'm ready to be stopping doing these just for the moment, because it has taken over the whole of July, and we've got Florin as well just here too. Has taken over the whole of July because you know you can't do these videos in a small enough amount to keep you occupied and keep you moving and making sure that you've got enough content to keep going. So that's why I've condensed it all into 1 month for you, so that you've got all of those videos ready. But as a trio, aren't they just adorable? Just absolutely precious. And as I said to you before, these are going to be coming out year after year after year. And I really do want to say a very, very big thank you to Anne Haldeos, as I know I have done with all of the videos, but really it was an extraordinarily generous gift of hers to ask me to make these tutorials and sponsored the kit for me so that I could bring it to her and to you as well. And so I hope that Anne's enjoyed stitching along with me, but I hope everybody else has enjoyed stitching too, because I certainly have. So all I want to say is thank you to you for watching. Thank you to you if you've subscribed. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope I've demystified the process. I know there's been a lot of debate around Florin's collar on his coat, so hopefully that's all sorted. Hopefully I've shown you that it is possible to machine sew the shoes as well, and that works really well for both Florin and for Pere. And I hope that I've just sort of taken you along step by step so that you feel more comfortable and more confident in your stitching. There's a lot of stitching in these. They are smaller than the normal Luna, so that, you know, it is fiddly stitching, but hopefully I've shown you that it is possible, and shown you how I've gone through it so that you can then have a good go at doing these yourself. One little housekeeping thing, and that is, please remember to clean your sewing machine after you've finished making the Festive Friends, because all of this faux fur is going to put all of those fibres into your machine, and you need to just remember that you need to be using a hoover near it to suck things out. Try not to use pressured air that blows fibres deeper into your machine. Instead, use a little brush or some little cotton buds, they also work sometimes, and oil it where it needs oiling, and just hoover your machine out, because it will be ready for it, believe me. When you'll be surprised how much you get out. So I'm off to do that now. But yeah, I just want to say Merry Christmas to everybody as well. I know we've got a few months to go, but hopefully with doing these videos you're now a little bit more prepped and ready to go. The other thing that I was going to say as well is that whilst the original kit for the Festive Friends is around £70, which I know is a lot of money, once you then have got the kit, which includes the pattern, the remake kit for the Festive Friends is about £40, I believe. So there's a big saving for your second and subsequent sets, because you've already got the pattern. So when you are ordering these again and you want a remake kit, so originally you have a make me kit which includes the pattern, and then a remake kit just includes the fabrics and the haberdashery to enable you to recreate these time and time again. So the price then is a lot more reasonable, I think, isn't it, really? But yeah, I'm off to pop these away. I'll take some pictures of them first so that I can do some posts on them for Instagram. If you want to follow me on Instagram, my handle is @SewSunnyTimes, so I'd welcome you over there as well, and I do pop pictures of my makes and let you know when new videos have been uploaded. If you're a subscriber already, that's fabulous. About 60-40 at the moment, in that 60% of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribers, which is why I always mention it. Your choice, of course, of whether you want to be a subscriber or not, but it'd be lovely to get that so that most of the people who watch my videos are subscribers, but no worries if not. And from the Festive Friends and me, from Florin, from Mary and from Pere Hiver, I want to say a big thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed stitching along with me. Take care everybody, bye.